Hello and welcome. This channel is called Aldsidu, meaning old ways or old customs. Today's video I'm going to compare heathen timekeeping to biblical timekeeping. The reason why is I get a lot of questions and a lot of confusion between the two, so I figured let's just do a video. Maybe it'll stop some of the email questions that I get. Now before I continue, I'm first going to compare biblical versus popular Christianity because they're different. I'm sure every one of you that is not Christian has been told by a Christian that we're going to hell when we die. We're going to burn in hell for eternity. Well, that's the difference between popular and biblical Christianity. Christians believe we're going to hell, but if you really read the Bible, it states that we're going to get thrown in a lake of fire and our soul is going to cease to exist. It's the second death. There is no burning in hell for eternity. Christians don't read the Bible any more than most Asatruar read the Eddas and Sagas. I would say Christians are as ignorant of the Bible as Asatru are of the Sagas in general. You have a few Christians that read the Bible and a few in Asatru that read the Eddas and the Sagas. And I'm not saying the Eddas and the Sagas are scripture equal to Christian scripture, but Christians, they believe the Bible is the Word of God in fact, and typically what they believe in their brain, popular Christianity, is different from biblical Christianity. Which brings me to my second point. I bump into Christians a lot and they're like, yeah, my grandpa died, he's in heaven. Well, I don't typically argue with them because they're grieving and I don't want to say that they're wrong. But according to the Bible, you know, Jesus comes back during the tribulation. And after that, there's a 1,000-year reign. And the rest of the dead, if you didn't get killed in the tribulation, they're the first resurrection. But the rest of the dead, the second resurrection, they all come to life after the 1,000-year reign if you read the Bible. So I'm putting Bible verses up there. I have no interest in reading these Bible verses. I just know what the Bible says because I've read it. I was a Christian in my past. I converted to Judaism in my past. I was an agnostic atheist in my past, and now I've been heathen for 2 decades, but that is my past. So, you know, in Christian thought, that's why you can't burn the bones. Like heathen burn bones in pyres. Because in heathen thought, or in Christian thought, excuse me, heathens can't burn bones. And when they got converted, they were forced, like in the Lex Saxonum, not to burn their dead. Because if you burn the bones, it's like you can't be resurrected. So apparently their all-powerful God is not all-powerful. But nonetheless, that's why. I mean, popular Christianity says, you know, when you die, you go to heaven. But the Bible, when you die, you sleep with your fathers, is the biblical phrase. And you sleep until you're resurrected. So pre-Christian heathenry, all souls go to a place immediately after they die. So actually pre-Christian heathenry matches popular Christianity, but is different from biblical Christianity. You know, we go to a place right away after our deaths. We go to Helheim or Ran or Folkvanger or Valhalla, depending how we died. You know, if we drowned at sea, we're going to Ran. If we died in battle, if we're chosen, we go to Valhalla or Folkvanger. If we die most other ways, we're going to Helheim immediately. But in Christianity or biblical Christianity, there's a time period. So point is, before we start comparing the time methods, you know, there's a difference between popular and biblical Christianity. And the same is true with modern heathenry. There's what, you know, Asatru teaches, and then there's what the Eddas and the Sagas and the historical sources state pre-Christian heathens did. They're often two different things. So in popular Christianity, the day is midnight to midnight. You know, the day in biblical Christianity is Vahi Era, Vahi Vok, or Yom Echad. I only read the Bible in Hebrew, sorry. So I'm not going to be quoting the Bible. I'm sure you're sad in English today, but you know, if you read Genesis, you know, God does things on the first day, and it's evening and morning day one, and it's evening and morning the second day. It's evening and morning the third day. So evening and morning, that's a day. The day begins with sundown. That's why, like in Fiddler on the Roof, Tevye is running on Friday because the Sabbath begins at sundown. He can't work after. He's got to get all his work done so we can enjoy the Sabbath. The same thing would be true for a pre-Christian heathen. I mean, you know, let's just say Yule begins at sundown on a Monday. I'm using some modern and heathen timekeeping concepts in one. I mean, the day begins at sundown, so you got to be ready for that bloat and symbol when Yule begins at sundown. So pre-Christian heathenry actually matches biblical, the day. It's sundown to sundown. And the Roman historian Tacitus writes in Germania in 117, I got the date wrong here, in 117 of the Common Era, he states that the Germanic peoples observed lunar months and the day begins with night. The community gathers if nothing unusual or sudden happens at certain times when the moon is new or full because they consider this the luckiest beginning to discuss matters. They also do not calculate the number of days but the number of nights. In this way they state purpose and commitment. Night does precede the day. So the biblical day begins at sundown. The pre-Christian heathen day begins at sundown. I assume popular and Aldsidu and popular Christianity are midnight to midnight because they don't really study the sources and understand the timekeeping of the respective historical faiths. Now, winter nights is a name of one of the three major pre-Christian heathen bloats. Weihnachten, which means sacred grove nights, is the heathen name for Yule, but it gets applied to Christmas. And the Christ Mass, I guess there's 12 days of Christ Mass in the church, but there were only 3 days of Yule in pre-Christian heathenry. But Weihnachten, Nachten is plural, so, even Yule was more than one night. So the Bible has the same concept of the day as the pre-Christian heathens did, but here's where things start to differ. The days of the week. The heathens did not have days of the week. They had days of the moon. And that's a big difference. I study the scholars and what they teach, but it's very clear, even if you read the sagas, you'll see days of the moon in the sagas. Excuse me, let me rephrase. You'll see days of the moon in the Eddas. In the sagas, because they cover later time periods, you'll see first day of the week. But in the Eddas, excuse me, it's days of the moon. And the scholar right here, the 7-day week is first attested in Scandinavia, excluding Iceland, in the beginning of the 11th century, where the day names of the 7-day week suddenly appear in skaldic poems. I mean, that's very true. It's not until the 11th century that a 7-day week is ever attested in Scandinavia. Iceland, they were Christian first. I mean, I understand they wrote down the poems, or their poems survived there, but they actually were the first to be Christianized. A lot of people don't realize that. And as I state, the Old Saxon Hellion, which is early 9th century work, has days of the moon waning and waxing, or waning and growing. The same thing is true with both Eddas, the Elder and Younger Edda. Aldsidu, most don't read it and don't realize that that's what's going on. So modern Aldsidu does have a 7-day week, just like popular Christianity does and biblical Christianity does. Old ways heathens, we're not concerned with days of the week. We're looking at the moon. We have days of the moon growing and shrinking. So, and that's a difference between pre-Christian heathenry and biblical and popular Christianity. There are no weeks. And then people argue with me all the time, well, of course the Proto-Indo-Europeans had a 7-day week. They would argue the names Thor, Thor's day and Woden's day and Frigga's day prove that they had days of the week because there's heathen day names. But that's wrong, because when the Romans came, they equated Mercury with Odin. So Mercury's day, Wednesday, became Odin's day. Mars' day, Thursday, became Thor's day. Venus's day became Frigga's day. That's how these were related. So the Romans come along. They name their planet names after the names of their gods, even though they were Christian. And then when they conquered areas, they did the Interpretato Germanica, where they renamed into the vernacular, the native languages of the people they conquered. They used their native gods' names for their planet names. So just because there's a Thor's day and an Odin's day doesn't mean that that's what pre-Christian heathens had in their timekeeping. So Proto-Indo-European peoples did not have a 7-day week. It's very clear. The Romans did not have a period of time called a week until the 2nd century. And when they did, they first had an 8-day week, and later was changed to a 7-day week. And I'll get to why in a moment. The flood story is actually older, the Noah and the flood. We have a flood story that's older than the Bible, the Epic of Gilgamesh. There's also a Sumerian flood story that's even older than the Epic of Gilgamesh. And in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the storm lasts for 7 days, a week. A dove is sent out after 7 days, and a Noah-like character of Utnapishtim leaves the ark 7 days after it reaches ground. The 7-day concept is very Middle Eastern thought. And again, the Greek and Romans in the first century and in their New Testament, written in Greek, later translated to Latin, they did not have a word in Greek or word for Latin for a 7-day period of time called a week. And then people argue with me, well, wait a minute, come on. I know that women went to the tomb on the first day of the week and saw Jesus rose from the dead. But if you go to Matthew 28:1, Mark 16:1, Luke 24:1, John chapter 20 verse 1, or you want to, Paul in Acts having a church service in his home in Acts chapter 20 verse 6, if I remember correctly, the Greek says 1 day from the Sabbath. The New Testament always says 1 day from the Sabbath because it doesn't have a word for week. It doesn't say on the first day of the week because there is no way to say that in Greek. You can say that in Hebrew, but you can't say that in Greek. And this is consistent throughout the New Testament, and it's consistent in all 1st and 2nd century, the Common Era writings. Okay, here's an example of Matthew 28:1, and just as I shared the other verses, you can look them all up too, but here's Matthew 28:1, after the Sabbaton, which is plural for Sabbaths. Why? Because Judaism can have 2 Sabbaths in a row, because the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the 1st and the 7th day is a Sabbath, and Passover is happening when Jesus is being crucified. So you have the first day of Unleavened Bread, followed by a 7th-day Sabbath going on. So after 2 Sabbaths, it was dawn. After one of the Sabbaths, Miriam came to the tomb. That's what's going on. So here you can see they translate this word Sabbaton, meaning week. But here they translate Sabbaton meaning Sabbaths. I mean, you don't have to be an expert in Greek to know that Sabbaton means Sabbath. This is very clear. Very clear. In other 1st century writings, like I said, where does the 8-day week come from? Well, here, Justin Martyr, who died in 165, in his dialogue with Trypho the Jew, said, the first day after the Sabbath, remaining the first of all days, is called the 8th day, according to the number of the days in the cycle. Why? Because we don't have a week yet, we have a cycle. And this remains the first. And this is a clear pattern in the first 2 centuries of Christian writings because they didn't have a word for week. They had cycles. And, days after the Sabbath. 4 days after the Sabbath is the 4th day, the week. So that's where this comes from, and that's why Rome had an 8-day week first and later a 7-day week. And did I skip a slide? Yes, I did. I get people arguing with me, the misery calendar. It proves that Germanic people have weeks, so you're wrong, Robert. I get one Aldsidu group who did the Aldsidu Edda tell me this. The misery calendar did have a 5-day week originally, and later they had a 7-day week. I mean, if anything, that tells you that they were confused at first because the misery system was invented by Christian Icelanders. It wasn't invented by heathen Icelanders. Heathens keep the old ways. They don't like to make changes to the old ways. The old ways are called old ways because they're old. You start changing old ways, they're new ways. So the foreign set, or the Aldsidu, was the pre-Christian heathen calendar. The misery calendar is a later calendar. I've already covered the Interpretado Germanica, but nonetheless, I get emails a lot, so I'm doing some math on my screen. You can pause it if you want. But Robert, you freaking beep, bop, bop, beep, I can't say the words. Each moon is 28 days, and there's 4 weeks in a day. And I don't even come back saying, well, by your logic, then what? There's a new moon every Monday? Or is it every Friday? I mean, no. Moons are every 29.5 days approximately. A lunar year is almost 354 days. It's a little longer. A solar year is a little bit more than 365 days. And if you divide 354 by 12, you don't get 28. If you divide 365 by 7, it doesn't come out to an exact number of days. If you divide the lunar year by 7, the lunar year and the solar year are not divisible by 7-day weeks. It doesn't make sense. So I don't know why people, it's like they don't do math and they don't think first. They just get mad and they throw a stupid argument at me. Another thing that I get a lot is, well, every 8 years and every 19 years, the moon and the sun get in the same spot. That's absolutely not true. They're close, but they're not. There's nothing ever exact in this. Okay, I literally put over 2,000 years and each day of over 2,000 years with the moon and the sun in Excel because I'm a CPA and I live in Excel. Okay, I know how to program Excel. It's all I do for a living. If you really study this hard, 33 solar years. So 33 times 365.217. Okay, that's how much a solar year is. Okay, 33 times 365.217 equals 12,052 days. But 34 lunar years, so 34 times 354.3671 equals approximately 12,048 days. So these do not line up. I mean, 33 solar years is close to 34 lunar years, but you can spread this out forever. And kind of like pi, it just goes on and on and on. They don't ever exactly line up. I mean, every 33 solar years, you get 3.5 days apart on where the sun and the moon are in relation to each other. So let's talk about what pre-Christian heathenry was. It was a lunisolar calendar. And what does that mean? It means the winter solstice is used to determine when a 13th moon is added. Okay, so for example, Dr. Andreas Nordberg, in his book on the dating of Yule, it states the pre-Christian Yule feast occurs on the first full moon after the first new moon following the winter solstice. So that's how they figured out when a 13th moon would happen. If Yule is always the first full moon after the first full moon after the first new moon following the solstice, that's how you'd figure out when to add a 13th moon. You use the solstice to do it. The Chronicon of Thietmar of Merseburg, he states very clearly that the midwinter bloats are in January. He states this very clearly. And he said it's after the birth of the Lord. Thietmar of Merseburg is Greek Orthodox, so the Christ Mass or the Greek Orthodox Christmas is January 6th. So in his mind, Yule was always after January 6th. So nonetheless, pre-Christian heathen timekeeping is 12 moons a year. You use the winter solstice to determine when to add a 13th moon. What is biblical timekeeping? And I'm not talking about Talmudic modern Judaism, because modern Judaism is lunar solar. But there's a difference. Modern Judaism's New Year, actually modern Judaism's New Year is about the same time as the pre-Christian heathenry's New Year, but the biblical New Year says modern Judaism is wrong. The Jews read Talmud more than they read the Bible. So what does the Bible really say? The Bible has a lunar agricultural year. It's not a lunisolar year. There are 12 moons a year, but you would add a 13th moon if the barley isn't ripe yet. Aviv is the Hebrew word that means ripe. So if I were to read the Hebrew for Exodus, or Shemot is what Exodus is in Hebrew, chapter 12 verses 1 and 2 and chapters 13 verses 3 through 4, the first month of the biblical year is Aviv, which means ripe. And that's approximately April. So after 12 moons or months in the biblical calendar, if the Karaites and the Samaritans and the high priest don't find that the barley is ripe in Israel, they had a 13th moon. And then the next month is the first month of the year. So that is an agricultural lunar calendar. And it's very clear in these two passages in Genesis. I'm not going to read these aloud and translate them for you, but you can look them up if you really want to see the English. In biblical timekeeping, the beginning of the year is in April. In pre-Christian heathen timekeeping, winter nights begins the year. Even Bede says in his De Temporum Rationae that they begin winter on the full moon of the moon that's called Winter Philith, which is when they started winter. So the year begins on a full moon to the Germanic peoples, but to the biblical peoples, it begins on the first day of a new moon when the barley is ripe in Israel. And that's why Karaim or Karaites and Samaritans, who actually keep the written Bible, modern Judaism is Talmudic, they keep the Talmud. These are different timekeeping ideas. Now let's compare holidays. Modern Aldsidu is an 8-spoke wheel of the year, 2 solstices, 2 equinoxes, and quasi-midpoints. And I say quasi-midpoints because I get all the time. Robert, May 1st is halfway in between an equinox and a solstice, when it's really 40 days after one and 50 days before another. Same thing with Groundhog Day. Same thing with August 1st. I mean, no matter, November 1st, no matter how you cut those time days, it's 40 and 50 days after, or 40 and 51. So, modern Aldsidu has that 8-spoke wheel of the year that comes from Wicca. Old Ways Heathenry has 3 bloats a year. The bloat to begin the year, which is winter, the midwinter bloat, and then the bloat to start summer. And in popular Christianity, every day is a holiday. Every day is a saint's day. I get this a lot too. I believe that the next slide. People say to me, there's not many saints' days. Walpurgis Night is one of the few saints' days, and that's why we know it's a pre-Christian heathen holiday, because they made it a saint's day, changing heathen day to a saint's day. I mean, because this is the month of August when I'm doing this video, I just pulled up the Franciscan monks, the friars. I pulled up their Saints' Day calendar, and you can see every day is a Saints' Day. I mean, if you're Catholic, one of my bosses, my former bosses, he always got to work at 9:30 because every day he went to 8 o'clock Mass, literally 7 days a week, because he did a Saints' Mass every day. Yeah, nothing was stolen from Saints' Days, because every day is a Saints' Day, if you really study it. So the church does have some major holidays, while every day is a holiday. I mean, the Christ Mass, whether it's December 25th or January 6th, because the Orthodox Church and the Roman churches don't agree. There's the Christ Mass. There's Good Friday, Easter, and the Greek Orthodox Church doesn't agree with the Roman Church there either. And then there's St. John's birthday, which the Orthodox and the Roman Catholics don't agree on, whether it's June 24th or July 5th. But in a sense, there's really 3 major holidays. There's St. John's birthday, Christ's birthday, and of course the death and resurrection of Jesus. Those are the main Christian holidays. The main days in pre-Christian heathen holidays would be Winter Nights, which is 3 nights. Yule, which is 3 nights. I believe that Summer Bloat was 3 nights, but in fairness, we have many passages that show Winter Nights was 3 nights, and many passages that show Yule was 3 nights. We don't have any passages that show the 3rd bloat was for 3 nights. We just don't. But, when people yell at me saying, well, we don't have any passages on 3 days of winter. Well, we have 2 passages that I found pretty quickly about the 3rd winter night. 2 different sagas state about the 3rd winter night. So we know that winter nights, plus winter nights, it's a plural word. Veternatum. It's a plural word. So we know that there were 3 major bloats, 3 nights. And in fairness, there's over 1,000 references to winter nights. There's over 1,000 references to Yule. There's around 10 to a dozen references to a bloat to begin summer. I mean, really, pre-Christian heathenry, you had 2 super major bloats, which was winter nights and Yule. Summer bloat was important, but it certainly is far less attested in the sources, which many of us have noticed. But it's there. But it's just not very well attested. So I'm not surprised you don't have a verse saying it was 3 days. We do have a couple sagas, more than a couple, but here are 2 passages that show that Yule was held for 3 nights, and Yule was kept holy for 3 days when no work was done. So the Jews they have Sabbaths. Every one of their holy days is a Sabbath. We also have the same true in the sagas. Heathens do not do work on their holy days. So if you like this video, visit aldsidu.com. Hey, I might want to plug in my battery. And like and subscribe. Join us on the Facebook group Aldsidu Saxon Heathenry. And thanks for watching.